SANDHAN, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Good afternoon, friends. Today we are here again with one of the good topic of English literature. It's a formalism from when the 20th century theories are getting their initiation. It's a germinating point for all the theories and the critical evaluation during the 20th century. Any evaluator of the 20th century would require a kind of understanding that why do they read the fiction or any amount of literature. Basically, formalism gives the initiative aspects to the literary criticism of 20th century. Here the students of literature must focus upon that. Theory, in brief, in the 20th century had its upper hand upon all the amount of literature that has been produced then after. Especially formalism, which has its longer inheritance, as you can see on the slide, that why do we require to have literature and especially the concept of formalism to evaluate the literature. The literature in itself has a discourse, and no discourse of literature is without the eminent presence of theory. That far from the monotonous reading aspects that we people generally do, that our reading is becoming monotonous if we don't have any dimension or the direction about how to read and what to read in the particular work of art. At the same time, the adventurous and exploratory readers would like to have their amount of thinking process which would be accordingly exploratory as well as adventurous. Means the theory gives the initiative aspect to the adventurous and exploratory readers to find out the hidden meanings out of the textbook, and that's why the theory and criticism becomes significant for the present day of the literary students. That there would not be any amount of literature or any amount of writing that cannot be evaluated with the help of theory and criticism, especially when we are learning literature produced from the various ages. It becomes necessary to evaluate those literary texts, those who are prescribed in our syllabus, with the help of theory and criticism. If the student has the acumen of understanding the literature with the help of theory and criticism, he can easily adapt himself with any literature produced from any age by any author. That's why it becomes necessary for adventurous and exploratory readers that they need to have the keen understanding of theory. To understand this basic concept of theory, I would like to introduce Jacobson's chart of linguistic communication. As you can see on the screen, to understand the effect of theorizing of literature, we would divide it into the two different parts. One, on the one hand, you have the addresser, on the second, you have the addressee. Between the addresser and the addressee, you can see the four aspects. Basically, context, message, contact, and code. That we generally, in human communication, linguistic communication, are playing the role either of addresser and addressee. At the same time, there are other factors, those who are functioning simultaneously. We generally don't look or forcefully observe them as context, message that we communicate. Context means in which context we are talking and in which surrounding we are communicating. At the same time, contact, whether it is direct contact or indirect contact, telephonic or face-to-face talk. As you have another form of drama as being performed on the stage, at the same time drama being read by the students of literature, as we people do inside the classroom, as well as a part of our examination preparation. Now at the same time, the last thing that we need to focus upon, the code. Code becomes very much significant for the students of literature, because codes can be the part of language as well as the punctuation as well. As we can see that code can be very much crucial to bring out the meaning out of what the addresser wants to say for the addressee. And at that time, the students of literature becomes different from the general readers. And that's why I have brought this context of linguistic communication diagram to understand how to theorize the literature in particular way. We would move towards one step further and would like to mold this diagram a bit for the purpose of discussing literature. Now addresser becomes writer and addressee becomes the reader. As you can see, I must bring you back to the earlier chart that addresser becomes the writer, addressee becomes the reader. At the same time, context remains the same, context about which we are talking, but the aspect of message becomes the writing. Means here addresser is not necessarily speaking either face to face or on telephone, either performing on the stage or being written and reading. Here the writer writes and it is writing which the reader reads. Now at the same time, context is as the textbook which is in our hand, and it becomes the code written in the form that a reader tries to evaluate. Now on the basis of these aspects between the writer and the reader, the three major aspects, combining 5 aspects, if we want to evaluate the literature, we have to divide it into the following manner. That writer becomes the focus of romantic humanist, as you have studied already. What was the mindset of Wordsworth? What was there in the mind of Coleridge while he was writing Kubla Khan? What was there in the mind of William Blake when he was writing Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright? Similarly, this romantic humanist will focus upon the mindset of any author writing in any age. That what is the mindset of the author is the concern of romantic humanist theorist. At the same time, going towards the upward, the Marxist theorist would focus upon basically the context of the environment, in which circumstances the writer has produced the work. Means the influence of the society upon the production of the work. Means if the society is helpful, certain kind of literature would be produced. If society is hostile, certain amount of literature would be produced. Means Marxists are concerned about the social aspects related to literature. At the same time, today what we are going to discuss is the formalist aspect. Means the writing that we had earlier seen in the earlier slide, I would like to show you the writing which was earlier the message becomes the writing, and writing becomes the formalist concern. Now why formalists are focusing upon the writing and what is the purpose of their focus upon the writing only, we shall discuss in detail in today's lecture. At the same time, the code would become the predominant area of focus for structuralists. Structuralist would focus upon the codes of writer that he applies in his writing. At the same time, readers-oriented theory would focus upon the reader's reception of the literature, that how the readers are also perceiving the literature. Especially the postmodernist theorists are majorly focused upon the how literature has been evaluated and consumed by the readers. Means what was going on in the mind of reader while he is evaluating or analyzing the literature. Now following that, we should like to see, or we must see, that what is the base of formalism. Basically, foremost we should discuss the name of F.R. Lewis, who experimentally in his classroom in Europe applied this theory in the practical form. That highly influenced by Arnold and Eliot, he went into his classroom to evaluate the process of reading. As we had discussed earlier, that formalists are focused upon the writing only. means that what is going on in the mind of writing that makes it different from the other writing. For F.R. Lewis, the criticism and philosophy are two different activities. That says that philosophy has its own function, whereas the criticism in the mind of critic is also having another different version. Means philosopher has its own function, whereas the criticism has its function to evaluate the literature in particular way. According to him, the critic is, I quote, attain a particular completeness of response to enter into the possession of given poem in its concrete fullness, I unquote. Means he wants to focus upon that the poem is in its fullness. If being evaluated, this would be the task of the critic. If critic is not evaluating a poem in its fullness, he is not justifying his role as the critic. Means a critic has to have a peculiar understanding of each and every small words that are being prescribed inside the poem. If he is missing a single punctuation mark of a poem, he is not justifying his task of critic as a critic of the particular work of art. He has been recognized, our F.R. Lewis has been recognized as the practical critic, the first practical critic whose concern was the text itself. Text itself means he used to give to the students of his classroom the poems without the name of the poet or any other title or any other detail about the age in which it was written. Means the students of F.R. Lewis has to read the poems and evaluate the poem without having even the title of the poem or the name of the poem, at the same time being apart from the information about the age. Means the words of the text on the dais would become the object of their criticism. Means the students have to have a peculiar understanding of the literature, that is to improve the work that is there written in front of them, and that would become the foundational stone of formalist evaluation as well. That says, I quote, word on the page, that apart from the words, there would not be any concern of the critic, as we can find in the romantic humanist that they are concerned about the Wordsworth's childhood, Wordsworth's youth, his elderly exploration of the life and his spiritual experiences. Here F.R. Lewis says all these things are not necessary for the critic, because critic has to focus upon the words on the page. Means apart from the words, there is no other concern for the critic according to the formalist way of evaluation. At the same time, Lewisian criticism did not require the theory. Now people would ask that how it's possible. It's possible because it was the mind of the reader and the words on the page, both those who are working together, and that's why it was not required to be called as the theory. But gradually it also had certain kind of amalgamation, and then you can have it as a form of theory. Now I would like to go back for a while that what is the difference between the formalist and the other schools of evaluation. We shall have the discussion in detail about the difference between the formalism and the Marxist school, whereas difference between the formalism and the other schools being post-structuralist or postmodern in the next time to come. In the next slide, if you can see the roots of formalism, that how the tree of formalism came into the existence. Formalism has basically originated from the Moscow and St. Petersburg in Russia in the early 20th century, was known earlier as the school of Opojaz, means the Society for the Study of Poetic Language in 1916. Opojaz used to have the people around, those who were concerned about the study of poetic language only. Except this poetic language, they were not concerned about anything else. But at the same time, they had to face the derogatory jibes from the opponents as well, that it was the formalism itself was the derogatory term, because according to the opponents of it, it used to focus upon the formal patterns and technical devices of the literature only. Now, the question would be in our mind that what is wrong in having the formal patterns and the technical devices of literature? The problem that arises by the formal pattern and the technical devices of literature only is that apart from the words on the page, you are not supposed to look away anywhere, whether it is the birth of the author, right of the author, age of the author, or any other information, personal information related to it. Now, let us move towards the prominent representatives of the formalist school in the earliest period. Boris Eichenbaum, Victor Shklovsky, and Roman Jakobson, whose diagrams we have modified according to our need in the earlier graphs. As you can see, these three were the prominent representative of the formalist school of theorizing the literature, evaluating the literature. This critical mode was supposed to suppressed by the Soviet government in 1930s. And that was the reason that the study moved to Czechoslovakia and continued under the name of the Prague Linguistic School in 1926. Means there was a suppression, as we could see the derogatory representation by the opposer of the Opojas, the school society for the poetic language. Similarly, the Soviet government also suppressed this evaluative mode of criticism, and it has to move to Czechoslovakia in 1930s as in the form of Prague Linguistic